So I'm just going to hand over to you.
So, Clint, you said that what you wanted was me to give just a bit of an overview about how I got to doing what I'm doing.
Pretty much, yeah. And then a bit of the kind of the role of the screenwriter as it relates, I guess, to the rest of the crew, to the overall production, that sort of stuff. But that can just be your opinion of what the role of the screenwriter is.
So in case people don't know what I do is, so I kind of always say that I'm really lucky to do this, but my mate Barbara would say, no, you've worked really hard, which is why you do this. Which is that I'm a full-time screenwriter, and I've been a professional writer for about the last 11 years, something like that. And I've really recently been in Plymouth because, as well as writing TV, so in terms of TV, most recently I've written Vera, which is a 2-hour crime show on ITV.
I know you've frozen.
So it's like, it's massive. That's I've frozen.
You froze then, yeah.
I've frozen. Right, okay, I'm going to probably do this on my phone, Clint, because that's going to be the way that it'll least buffer. Hold on.
Let's try that.
I'm going to just leave.
She's gone. Not coming back. She'll be back in a second. There, that's better.
Is that better?
That works.
Yeah, can you hear me and everything?
Yes. I can. Everyone else hear Sally?
Yes.
Yeah, great. Okay. So I've written like Death in Paradise, I've written Eastenders, I've written Casualty, and most recently I've actually been at Plymouth Theatre Royal with a play called I Think We Are Alone that was done by Frantic Assembly. So I've been kind of crossing TV and theatre. Can I say this is really odd because now I can only just see one person. I'm going to probably just try and look at you, Clint, and then I can see you because it's all a bit odd. So here's the thing, right? I wanted to work in theatre or TV and film since I was about 7. But I kind of couldn't do that because my parents didn't really think it was a proper job to do. So I remember when I was trying to do I wanted to pick my O-levels, my GCSEs, and I wanted to do drama, and they went, yeah, but it's not, just do it as A-level because it's not quite academic enough. And when it came to A-level, they went, look, just pick academic A-levels, and then you can do it in your degree. And when it came to the degree, my dad, who had to pay quite a lot for my degree, said, I'm not paying for you to do that because it's not a proper job. So I didn't get to do the writing, which is what I wanted to do, until I was actually 40, which is kind of real. But I was writing from a really early age. So from the age of 7 or 8, I think I wrote my first play, which I put on at school as an assembly. And then I did quite a lot of, I wrote little plays, I wrote stuff at university. And this might sound really, really stupid, but I didn't feel like I was a proper writer because I just didn't think I was clever enough, and I didn't wear glasses. And I thought, to be a writer, you've got to be really, really clever and wear glasses. And I think there's a bit of a gap in people think that to be a writer, you've got to be really, really, really intellectual and use a lot of really, I would say fancy, but what I actually mean is incomprehensible dialogue. So the kind of, like, people think you're clever if you're having to use words that you then have to look up in a dictionary, which I don't personally kind of think is great. I think you've just got to connect people. Can I just check, are you all able to hear this and everything? Yeah, okay, great. You can, great, okay. So so I then and then like I just didn't feel like really I could be a writer, even though that's what I really wanted to be, because I was like thinking, oh, it's not a proper job, whatever. But anyway, I ended up training at a thing called the Hope Street Project at Liverpool, which was in the late 90s, and it trained you to be a community arts worker. And this was at a point in the country where that kind of work didn't really exist. So like youth theatres or just any kind of participatory work. Just it didn't kind of exist in that same way. And I ended up getting a job like really young, about 22, at English Touring Theatre, which is where I met Clint, because Clint was in my youth theatre, but Clint was chair of my youth theatre committee, because we had a thing where we said that the ownership of the group came from the people who were in that group. And we wrote, we did a lot of plays together, I think, Clint, maybe about 6 or 7.
Yeah, we did about six plays, a couple of tours.
Yeah. And it was a tour. I mean, we used to devise everything. So we would kind of devise stuff. We would kind of work out what as a group people were interested in, and then we would devise it, and then I would go away and write it, and I would write stuff really quickly. And I have to say, and I don't really think this has changed that much, is I hate, and most writers will, that they don't really enjoy writing that much. My mate Tony says he loves having written, but he does, the writing is really, really difficult. And I'm just going to talk a little bit about that, because one of the questions I get asked quite a lot is, but what do you do when you don't feel the muse, or when you don't feel inspired? And it's like, my answer to that is you just have to get on and do it, because it's like a plumber until they feel inspired to change the washer on a tap, or until the muse has said to them, change that washer on the tap. You've just got to do it. And it's exactly the same with writing. You got to, so I'd had this sort of thing. I didn't wear glasses. I found writing really, really difficult. But one of the things that I really got from doing the youth theatre with Clint was we got to see people watching it a lot. And we would have a thing where, and this happened, I think, a few times, Clint, which was like on the second night, a lot of the audience from the first night would come back. And then on the third night, you'd have the audience from the first and the second night and that come back. And what that gave me was that it's possible to write and put stuff on that really has quite a deep connection with the audience. And so I've just got to wipe my nose. I haven't got corona. But there is, I really advise for a lot of people, like doing stuff within theatre, or whatever our version of theatre is now going to be for the foreseeable future. But it is a really, really low budget way of doing stuff and seeing people's response to it immediately. And in some ways it was similar to like when I worked on Eastenders, because we'll talk about Eastenders, but it's like there's, you know, fundamentally you have between 8 and 10 weeks to write your episode. Then there is maybe between 6 to 8 weeks whilst they get that episode ready. And then you watch it in front of everybody. And like when I was writing on it, there were like 10 million people. So you really got to see what people thought about it. And you learn things like never, ever give the costume department notes like Ryan wears a false moustache, because it will look terrible. It will look, I mean, they literally put a carpet on his upper lip. And I was just like, what? So you learn really quickly, oh, I can't give those kind of notes because they don't have time to do it in the way that I was hoping that they would do it. Anyway, going backwards. So I worked at English Touring Theatre and had a really amazing group of people that I was working with there. And it was also the reason I think why I didn't want to kind of go and become a writer kind of properly, because actually I got so much stuff out of what I was doing with people. And I was working with young burglars, I was working with unemployed adults, I was working with homeless. It was like, and all of this stuff actually.
Just to be clear, I wasn't the young burglar. Just to be really clear, that wasn't me.
But it was really interesting, because I have to say, like, one of the brilliant things about a writer is every single thing you do in your life is useful, because you just bring it in. I mean, I created a show called The Coroner, which was on BBC One a few years ago. And one of the 6 regular characters in that was called Clint Holman, which is based on Clint and James Holman, who was in my youth theatre. But like literally, you as a writer, the way I see it is like you have a bag, and in that bag you fill it with stories, and we are like, I quite often say writers are like vampires, because you just want to get every single bit of things that you can, and then you apply what I call the mixing desk technique, where you kind of go, all right, but let all the magic if. So what if this happens instead, or this? But a lot of my stuff, it tends to be drawn from truth, and then that truth kind of gets changed, whatever the story is. Anyway, so I was at English Touring Theatre, and then I went to Contact Theatre in Manchester, which was like probably like the country's most diverse theatre outside of London. But I wasn't allowed to do anything at all that was artistic or creative. I was very, very much a producer there. So I was building like a lot of projects, but not able to actually ever be an artist anymore, because I was seen and paid to be a producer. And so I ended up meeting my husband, who was an actor. And that was a really big thing. We got engaged within 6 days, and we've now been together for 23 years. And we're going to write a show about that at some point. But in my holiday with him, the theatre gave me space to rehearse. So every holiday I was working with Michael, with a team of actors. And what we were trying to do was marry youth theatre methodology, which was that whole devising way of writing. And I would really advise, if you haven't read it, which is read Mike Leigh's biography. I can't remember if it's called All or Nothing, but there's a Mike Leigh biography. And Mike Leigh is a filmmaker. I'm sure probably quite a lot of you have heard of him. And it's Leigh is Leigh. And he does a lot of devising work. And then he writes the script, and they film it. And he does a very interesting way of working, which is the actors don't meet each other unless their characters meet each other, and then they only meet each other in kind of for the first time when they're in the situation that he's going to be filming. So it kind of and again, he does this thing of he kind of really interrogates them for their character, and they base their characters on somebody that they know. And it's just quite interesting. Anyway, so we wanted to marry that Mike Leigh way of working with professional actor training, because my husband is a professional actor, and it was really, really interesting and very useful. And then actually, I kind of picked up that work a few years later, because I then had kids. But then I picked up that work later, and I wrote a play called Martha Loves Michael, about an obsessive Michael Jackson fan, which we took to Edinburgh. Which I have to say, this is one of my top tips. Right, that was a really hideous experience, and that was because we'd got funding for it, and really weirdly, it was harder because we had funding. Because then it was at this certain level in people's heads, and actually it didn't quite match up with what we were trying to do. It felt like we were trying to do something as a family, and then actually it was I nearly lost my house over it. And it was a real lesson in, don't take work out to a place where you don't think it's ready. Or when, like with something like the Edinburgh Fringe, we had the reviewers came to the second ever performance of that play and gave it 3 stars, but it was the second ever performance of that play. And that meant we were kind of like buggered, because 3 stars is no good in Edinburgh. You got to have more than that. And it was just really tough, and it was quite brutal. And kind of after that point, I thought, I don't want to have to be the producer as well as the writer. I want to just be able to do writing on my stuff and not have to be responsible for all that other stuff, because ultimately it was taking me away from it. Is this all making sense, Clint, to you? Great, okay. So then I carried on doing participatory work, and by this time I was like 38. So I was 38. I'd wanted to be a writer since about the age of 7. And if there's one thing you take from this, is do not wait as long as I waited to do this. Just do it. You can just do it. And I wish I'd really known that you could just do it. And I think it's because as well, there's a lot of like, particularly in theatre, there can be quite a lot of snobbishness and people wanting to protect their little bit of territory. And I trained in Liverpool, where that did well. There was a bit of that, but not a great deal. People just went and did it. But there's an awful lot of status and hierarchy that can go on in theatre, and there's an awful lot of people who protect that because they've really benefited from it. And it can just be tough, whereas actually just doing stuff yourself is much better. Anyway, so when I was 38, I'd been developing something with my husband and another friend who had watched the play. The play we took to Edinburgh did really badly, but a few really key people saw it, which was and even though we called it kind of a bit of a runt of a play, we weren't totally in control of the story of it, and so it just wasn't as well written as it could have been, and it had way too many monologues and not enough action. But yeah, we met people through that. So we'd started developing a TV script, and then it was, we thought the TV script might be happening, and I was doing a freelance job at the time as a theatre producer. And I remember the person that I was working for said, well, if they decide they want to make it, you're going to have to give us 3 months notice. And I just thought, I spent years working for this. I'm not giving 3 months notice. I'm going to just do it. Anyway, he said, well, you're going to have to make a decision. Do you want to be a writer? Oh, Clint's gone to the loo. Quick, talk about him. No, I'm joking. Yeah, so it's like, see, I've now done a gag and I've completely forgotten what I was saying. Damn. Yeah, that was it. He said, right, you've got to make a choice now. Either you're going to stay and work with us, and you're going to have to take on your job. You're going to have to go for this job and it become a permanent job, or you're going to have to leave. So actually, I resigned, which was really quite a scary thing. So I was 38. Because I was getting towards that point where I just thought, 40 is quite a big. I mean, I'm sure for a lot of you, 40 seems really, really old. And it did seem really old to me, but it felt like I want to be doing the thing that I want to be doing, and I wasn't doing it. So I gave my notice and gave 4 months notice, and I went away on a writing road trip, which was the best thing I could have done because I had 2 really young kids, a lot of washing, a lot of cleaning, a lot of just general housework and messiness to deal with. So I left that for 9 days, and I went and stayed with friends and just did like a lot of writing. So I came up with the idea for a feature film, like literally a 5-page treatment. It was a horror film. It was a horror film for teenage girls because I love horror films and I don't see a lot of films which are targeted at teenage girls. And I also wanted to write a horror film where you really, really cared about everybody who died. I didn't want just to be like bodies that you could just get rid of. I wanted there to be an emotional consequence to them dying. And this also comes back to what I learned with the youth theatre, which was I'm not interested in writing anything where the audience watches it and they go and that is it. I'm really not interested in that. I spend hours and hours and hours and hours and hours and hours and weeks and months writing stuff, and I want it to have a bigger impact than that. So I write stuff that I want to have a physiological effect on my audience. And whether or not that is that they laugh or they cry or the hairs go up on their arms, or ideally they turn to the person next to them and say, I really love you, or they pick up the phone. It's like, I want whatever I do to exist beyond what we're seeing it. Now that is like, I'm sure probably most writers would say that. But anyway, I really wanted to, so that's where with the film, I wanted to create that response where we really cared about them. And then I got back and I wrote it really, really quickly. And I'd come up with a few other ideas, but this was the one. And I wrote it really quickly, like 3.5 weeks. And the thing I would say to you all is always, I don't know if Clint makes you do this or if you do this anyway, if you write, but always outline first. Doesn't have to be like I'm doing Vera, and Vera is written off a 37-page outline that I have spent 9 weeks working on. My spec stuff generally is of something that is about 5 pages long that I've written really quickly. When you're working with other people, they will have a lot more questions that you need to answer and greater detail. But even if you're writing a spec, and a spec is something that you're writing without getting paid for, so it's just something you're writing as your way to go, hey guys, this is me. Plan it, because people think there is a higher art in doing something where you just write it and you don't know where you're going. You're just going to see what happens. And that, for me, is like wasting loads of time. It's like writing an essay, but not actually having a question at the start that you're asking. It's like, why would you do that? I remember when I worked in theatre, the accountant said, we need to have goals. Because otherwise we don't ever know if we're winning or we're losing or we're hitting things. You don't know. You've got to have that. So going back to what I was saying, so I wrote this horror film. So I wrote this thing off a little treatment, and then what I did is I showed it to this is going to sound a bit counterintuitive, but it's the biggest thing that I've learned, which is when you're writing, don't spend all your time at your computer writing it and getting no sleep and hardly eating whatever and just writing it till you get to the end, because there's a thing missing out of that, which is you need your subconscious to be processing and working the whole time, because quite often there's an issue with what you're writing, and if you're just trying to solve it like here and now, your brain isn't actually properly processing it. So I've now discovered that actually some of my best thinking and processing time is when I'm doing the washing up or when I'm watching Gordon Ramsay's Kitchen Nightmares US, which are really good thing to a bit of inspiration, or Location Patient. But it's literally when your brain is looking away at something else that allows your subconscious to start to process issues that you've got. And you will always do better work if you've thought about it than if you've just done it. And in the end, that's going to save you a whole load of time, because you're not going to have to undo and fix all the stuff that you weren't really thinking about that it was art. Because some people can do that. One of my best mates, Tony Jordan, is one of the biggest writers in the country. He created Life on Mars. He does Death in Paradise. He did Hustle. But he is like a ninja at story. So he could just meet anybody and just turn it into a story like that. So anyway, so going back to what I was saying, so you give yourself thinking time. I show my stuff like with that spec. I showed it to about 3 different people, and I got their feedback. And some of the feedback was different, but you just have to go, oh, okay, you think this, because quite often what you've got in your head doesn't quite come across on the page, and that's what you need to you need to make sure. You're not trying to explain everything, but you just want to make sure that you're being really clear. And also, why wouldn't you listen to really great ideas that other people have got that you might not have thought of? So I did another couple of passes on that, and then there was a thing called the BBC Drama Writers Academy, which was, they were looking for, and it was like year 3 of this, they were looking for 8 writers to come in and work in a classroom for 13 weeks with John York. And John York at the time was the boss of Casualty, EastEnders, Holby and Doctors and other stuff. And what had happened was there'd just been a massive upturn in the number of scripts that were needed. So I think Holby 2 years beforehand had gone from 20 scripts to 48. And that is an awful lot of writers to find. And they're quite long shows as well. And John wanted to create this way of getting writers who writers, we naturally know how to tell stories, but what we might not always get is structure and understand how structure works. And you need to be able to be in control of your structure to be able to rewrite it. Does this make sense to people? It's like trying to build a bed or something, or a cupboard, and not actually having any instructions, and being blindfolded, and also wearing gloves so you can't actually feel the length of any screws, and in the dark. But anyway, and the idea was that you do 13 weeks in a classroom doing a lot of stuff on structure with really amazing, like the best writers. So like Jed Mercurio, who did Line of Duty, and Russell T Davies, who's behind Bring Back Doctor Who, and Jimmy McGovern, who is one of our best and most political writers we have ever had in this country. He does a lot of TV. Anyway, and then from that, if you graduate, you go on and you write an episode of Doctors, an episode of EastEnders, an episode of Holby, an episode of Casualty. over the next year. And if those show, and you get paid, and if those shows like you, they invite you back to do more work. So now, really interestingly, I'd done a lot of youth theatre work. So I'd done a lot of devising and writing. I'd written quite a lot with my husband. And I had actually flukily written an episode of Doctors. But what I never had until April 2008 was I never had a spec script, which was a script written just by me, not for something which already existed, like Doctors already existed. They wanted, I didn't have a script which demonstrated that with my head, I can create a whole world and a whole story with characters and everything. And it's such an obvious thing, but you cannot get anywhere as a writer without a spec. You won't be able to, because they need to know that. And no matter how good a talk you give, and I could give good talk, which is why I got into Doctors, but without a spec, they don't know. And I think this is a really good thing about a writer, which is more than I think any other kind of creative thing. It's much more equal, because you can't deny a good script. You've got to get it into the right hands, and that's another conversation, but you can't deny a good script, and you can't deny talent. And actually we can all do that in our rooms, or in our sheds, like I'm in my shed at the moment. But what we don't have is, to be an actor, you've either got to create your own opportunities or wait for somebody to give you a job being an actor. Whereas being a writer, you can just write it. Anyway, I'd sent it off for that, and I'd also wanted to work on EastEnders because, I want to earn money. I worked in theatre for a really, really long time, and theatre is really, really badly paid. So I did want to earn a bit of money, and I also wanted what I realised was those things that I was doing with the youth theatre audience, that thing about making that audience feel something. I wanted to do that on a much bigger scale. And you're with soaps, you're dealing with an audience of millions. So actually, if you want to say something about, I don't know, how we treat the elderly, you want to find a good place to put that. You put that in a soap, because you're going to have millions of people watching it. So, for example, at the moment, I'm running the Good Neighbours scheme for my village because of the pandemic. And one of the people that I'm working with really closely, he's one of my admins, is actually a police detective in the Met in Westminster. And he said to me the other day, we're having to deal with a huge amount of domestic violence now. That's all we're dealing with is domestic violence. And female on male, as well as male on female. So one of the first things I did actually was get in touch with my soap friends and go, this is a really massive issue, and I know that the good they could do. Anyway, Sally, you're digressing. Just go back onto the topic. So I was going for EastEnders, and I went for the Writers' Academy at the same time, and I got onto both. And so in the end, I just did the Writers' Academy, and it was really relentless. In 13 weeks, as well as having classes 4 days a week, which were like 30 miles away, I had to write 3 Doctors episodes and 3 drafts of each, and a Doctors episode's about 40 pages long, plus treatments, which is the outline where you do all the story but not the dialogue beforehand, and a fairy tale adaptation, 3 drafts of that, and also a treatment for Holby, which was about 15 pages long, and loads of stories. So that the workload was like that, and they did that deliberately because they wanted to recreate what happens when you go onto these shows. And I ended up working a lot on EastEnders and a lot on Casualty before I went and created my own show. But like on EastEnders, you've got to have that. You've got to be able to just do it really quickly. Hold on, my husband's going to be. Oh no, I thought my husband was coming in, but he's not. You've got to work really, really quickly because. Would it be useful for me to just explain how it would work getting commissioned on something like EastEnders?
Yes, that would be useful, I think.
Okay, so what happens once you got your job of working on the show, or you told you like, okay, we want to work with you. You're then told, right, well, we might use you for, okay, we're going to use you for the June commission, right? But you don't always get used for the June commission. And this is a really difficult thing, because sometimes you might find 2 days beforehand, oh, they're not using me, but actually I've already said I'm going to do that. Anyway, so what will happen is normally commissioning is on a Monday. So on Friday, generally at about 11:30 at night, you will get the commissioning document, and this is password protected. And that is because these documents are worth thousands and thousands of pounds to the press. And we have had cases where somebody has left a document on a train and it has been sold within half an hour for several £1,000s. And there are people who get jobs there just to steal stuff. It's just quite crazy. So you get a document, you get a commissioning document, and there's 2 bits of this commissioning document. So you get a commissioning document which has that whole month's stories in it, and it works in a commission document will contain 4 blocks, and a block is a week of episodes. So it will have the outlines for those 4 blocks. So for the whole of June, we'll see the commissioning document, and each episode has 2 pages, and it has this is when I was on it. I haven't been on it for about 5 years, maybe longer than that. But it will have an A, B, a C, D, and an E story. And some of them will be tiny, other ones will be bigger. And the hook will be in bold, because writing something like Eastenders is about baton passing, because it's about you're getting the baton from the person before with the duff, and then you're passing on to the next person. And quite often what they say is, look at the viewing figures of the next episode, because that will tell you how well your episode did, because it'll be how many people came back. Anyway, so you'll see your episode, and you'll see the stories they want you to tell. And generally I will have read all the documents before that, because there'll be a gap of about 4 months between what you're working on and what's on screen, because they're filming it and everything. And then the other document that comes with it, well, there's 2 other bits to it, is there's a research document. So if you've got a thing about domestic violence, there will be a whole load of information and research the research department will have done about it. And then you'll get the scheduling document. And this is when writing Eastenders is like doing a really complicated 3D jigsaw, because it will have things like, it will tell you exactly who is available and who isn't available, and where they're available and where they're not available. So in Eastenders, they film a block, which is 1 week's episodes, over 2 weeks. The first week they film everything outside. So Minute Mart, fronts of houses, Albert Square, the market, the tube station, whatever. The second week they do everything that's inside. And it's because there might be really, really bad, atrocious weather in week 1. So it's easy to do it that way. So you might have a fight in the Vic, right? So you have a fight in the Vic. So somebody outside the Vic walks in, right? And outside the Vic goes, I'm going to have a word with Phil. He's asked for this. Walks in, really angry, goads Phil. Phil pushes him in the pub, pushes him outside. They have a bit of a fisticuffs. They come back inside. So the thing to get is that, I'm going to get Phil. That is filmed the week before. They do the bit in the pub where they fight and they push him out. And that thing where they've pushed him out, they've actually filmed him coming out the week beforehand. And it's like, it's really complicated. I once had this really big episode. It was my first big episode. And it was a funeral episode. And there was a thing with Whitney and her brother Ryan. And it was a really big story about them coming together. But when I saw the scheduling document, I realised that Whitney was not available for anything to be filmed inside, and Ryan wasn't available for anything that was going to be filmed outside, which meant, how can they both be in a story together at the same time? Well, I'll tell you why. Because you end up employing somebody who looks very much like Whitney from the back, so you can cheat it, but you have to kind of work out all of these things. And so in the commissioning document, so you'll read it all through and you'll check before you go into commissioning, does this all make sense? Is there anything I want to do? Or actually, would I really, really like to have this scene at night? And anything like that is a thing that you've got to ask them about, because anything that involves kids, animals, nighttime are all more problematic and more expensive because of how all the rules are. So you might try and barter. Like there's one episode where I said, look, I really want to create that thing that happened with the baby swap where everyone's really worried about the baby, because this is another story being worried about the baby. So I haven't got them in the scheduling document, but can I have this person and this person and this person? And they would go, yes, you can, but that scene can be no longer than half a page long. So you write Eastenders with loads and loads and loads of stipulations. And actually what I found is, in a way, the more restrictions, the freer it makes you, because quite often I find the hardest thing about being a writer is the blank page, because you have infinite possibility for where you go and what you do. And actually, the more you kind of cut down that, the easier in a way that it becomes. So then you will write, you will do maybe 5 drafts. I mean, the big thing I will always say about writing is rewriting. You know, only a very, very small amount of time is spent on writing something for the first time. The rest of the time it is rewriting, because you can never get anything right the first time, you know, certainly not as a writer. And I mean, you'd have to be a real mad genius to be able to do that, because it's so collaborative. I mean, you're working with the costume department and locations and stunts and everything. It's really collaborative. So you'll do that, and the longer and the closer it gets to shooting, the less time you have to write. So the first stage, you might have your first draft, you might have 10 days to write that in. And then your second draft, you might get a week to write that in. And then by the time it gets to your third, fourth, fifth draft, you're talking about a day or 2 days. And that's when working on a soap is really challenging, because what might happen is you've got a script which on Tuesday, that's when it's all being signed off. It's going to all the departments. They're going to be shooting it on the Monday, but you get a phone call on Monday night saying, okay, the lead actress we're using in this story, the regular, she's gone and had a load of plastic surgery done over the weekend. And now she looks nothing like her, and we've got to wait for all her swelling to go down. So we have to take her out of that episode, which then means that you've got to rewrite all of that from scratch. Or, I mean, it's crazy. Like when we had the baby swap episode, which was about 10 years ago. And it was a bit of a real difficult story. Where two women had a baby at the same time. One of the babies died. The mother whose baby died was so grief-stricken. She went out on New Year's Eve as the chimes were going, and she heard the sound of another baby, and she went and she swapped the babies around. So then that mother, who had been downstairs during the chime, then discovers that her child is dead. And it was all very convoluted because they had to be wearing exactly the same outfits and everything, and really strange. But an online group had heard about the story and had campaigned. So the minute that story dropped, there were over 10,000 complaints, which meant that we had to rewrite those stories like almost immediately. And it's really, really full on. And quite a lot of the time, you will have writers who, you know, they'll feel a bit gaslit by stuff because you'll be told one thing in one draft, and then you've got to go back and do the other, or it's like your own levels of confidence and anxiety. I mean, mine was kind of through the roof on something like Eastenders. You just can't cope, and it's like, so you have to do everything really, really, really quickly and really fast, and then do it. And then interestingly, you don't really have much involvement. So Clint, I'm going to just talk a little bit about how I work with everybody else. Was that useful, hearing about Eastenders?
I think so, yeah.
Was that useful to the rest of you guys? I could only really see Tony. So you give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down, Tony. Thumbs up, great.
Everyone else is thumbs upping as well, that I can see.
Brilliant. So it's like, I mean, this is why I love TV writing, because it's really, really collaborative, and I quite like those challenges. Like I quite like being able to speak to the stunt fight director and go, right, I've got a fight in my episode between two of the women, and I want to do a fight that we've never seen before. So so we created, which actually was a bit weird because then Harry Hill, I don't know if you know Harry Hill, but then he called my fight the Bush Push and kept showing it on his thing. Sadly, I got no money for that, which is a real shame because I really should have done. Anyway, so yeah, so one of the really odd things is these shows are massive, right? The soap. So, and I wrote a lot of Casualty. I wrote a lot of end of episode. I've set fire to the hospital. I've done riots. I've done helicopter crashes. I've got a coach on the edge of a cliff and I've thrown it off a cliff. So all of that is really great and really exciting. And I have to say, just as an aside, so Clint, you might have to bring me back, which is what was my point that I was going to say. It was how we interact with people. And I've forgotten the other thing I was going to say. Oh yeah, that was it. One of the really great things about a writer that I love is how you get let in through the doors of worlds that you don't belong in. Or so, for example, it's like I have been in the back of an ambulance wearing a high-vis jacket with people that are being picked up and taken to hospital who might have just attempted suicide because I'm there on research. They just think I'm just a medic advisor or whatever. I've been in rooms with doctors as they're giving diagnosis to patients. I've been in a heart bypass surgery. I've watched that. I've been in morgues and I've talked to pathologists and I've heard their funniest stories. Yes, their funniest stories. And I've been with exorcists because I was doing a thing about demonic possession. So I did a whole lot, and it's like they kind of, and quite often as a writer as well, people will say, gosh, I never normally tell people like this. And like I said, going back to the vampiric thing, you're just like, tell me it all. And it's weird because as a writer, you also, when somebody tells you something really bad, your instinct is to go, great. Oh, I mean, that's awful, but great. I can make a little note here in my book. Anyway, so how we work with others. So like Casualty and Eastenders are like just massive, massive beasts. So on something like Casualty or Eastenders, as well as your episode, they could be filming another 4 to 8 episodes. So it's like relentless. So you don't have a chance to talk to all those other people that are in production because quite honestly, they don't have room for that noise because they're already on a really, really tight deadline with what they do. So the way it works is who you hear from as a writer on those is you hear from your script editor, who they're the people who are trying to make your script into the best it can be. And I like to think that a script editor should be a writer's friend, but they're not always like that. And then you'll have your senior script editor and the story department, and then the script producer and the series producer. And the reason you have all these levels and different ones of them read at different times is when you write your first draft of something like EastEnders, nothing else exists around it. There is nothing else. There are no other scripts around it. You're all just, you're doing it off a story document, which may or may not work, but you're literally just putting a pin in a map going, this is what it is. And then as the other episodes around you get further developed, they start going up the chain. So you need those people, like you don't want a really senior reader to be reading your first draft because a lot of that first draft may change. You need new eyes constantly who can go, oh, hold on, that, no, we've changed that on this, or that doesn't work. And then what happens is they bring in your director, and then the director will give notes. But they have a really weird thing, and I've really found this in TV. They do not like the writer and the director talking at all in TV. It's really strange. Your relationship is with your producer, your script editor, your exec producer, your series producer, your script producer. It's like they don't like you talking to the writer, which is where Twitter comes in, because I'd say almost every single thing that I've done, the director and me have found each other on Twitter. And so we've had like little, don't say this publicly, Clint, but we have little secret conversations about it. So we will talk about things. And it's really odd. I mean, after I'd done EastEnders and Casualty for a bit, I created my own show called The Coroner, which was partly filmed in Plymouth. It was largely set in South Devon, and we used Plymouth for a lot of the locations. And even on that, I wasn't really allowed to interact. They certainly didn't want me interacting with the actors. They certainly didn't want me interacting with the other writers. And in fact, other writers were told, you don't have to listen to Sally on anything that she says to you, which I find quite interesting, because really all I want whatever I'm writing to be the best it possibly can. And I think this is a really important skill, which is to not be defensive about your work. So like I'm working on Vera, and I've just delivered my my first draft a couple of weeks ago, and then it's a lot. So this, right, I'm going to show you this because you won't be able to see it. Okay, so these are my notes for my first draft. It is over 12 pages of notes, right? And some of these little things here actually are like 90% rewrites, but it's really important, I think, to meet the people that you're working with as equals and not be the child in the relationship and that they're the parent with all the knowledge. Like, you've got to go in as equals. So it's like when I have meetings, about my scripts, one of the first things I do is I give them my notes. So which will be, because my job, I think, as a writer is to get to a script into the best situation it possibly can. And when I kind of go, I literally don't know how to make this any better or whatever, and deadlines are really important, is asking them. So I'll go in with questions, and it's really important that you do that and not think that whatever it is you've written is perfect and it's precious, because I'll tell you this, right, it might be precious, it is not going to be perfect. And a little aside, this is like one of my directors who I spoke to said, so he said he'd really, really enjoyed working on one of my scripts, and it was just really great. He said, because some of the other stuff, he said, let's just say, you can always roll shit in glitter and make it sparkle, but it's always shit behind the sparkle. And I think that is really true. We can make stuff look great, but actually mining down is harder. So it's a very weird relationship, the writer, I think, with everything else. I mean, I get to go to filming quite a lot, although not as much now because I just don't feel like I've got time. And like, say, Vera is filmed 200 miles away from me, and that is a day to get there, spend some time. That's a lot of travelling, and I tend to work 6 days a week. I finished writing last night at 11:30 last night, and I will be doing 12-hour days for the next 7 days. But, Sally, you've forgotten what you were saying again. What were you saying? Oh, yeah, when I go to filming, what I do like to do is I like to try and talk to as many people as possible, just to go, what is your job and how does that work? Like, it was a real revelation to me when I realised that the costume department, basically, one of the big things they do is they tell us what day of the week it is, because if people have changed their costumes and continuity. And that's so simple, but that's just how you define a day without having to go, it's Tuesday today, it's Wednesday today. It's like they're wearing different clothes. We know what it is. We know what's happening. So I would go and talk to everybody and find out what they did and how, and if that could make what I do better, to understand, go, oh, right. So like, to understand. I remember like I had, when you write a script, and quite often the stuff that I write is really quite technical, because, and this might sound crazy, but just things like opening a door and having somebody going through a door and then having a look at this or a look at that, or picking something up and seeing that, all of those different camera setups, which all take a lot of time. And so I remember going to watching Casualty, and they were doing, and it was all so bitty because of what I'd written. I said, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to do that again. I'll make it easier. And they went, no, do not make it easy for us. We don't want it to be easy. We love this. We love it that actually, it's a bit more of a challenge for us. And I think that's really important, that you don't, that all you're thinking about is, how do I make what I'm doing the best it can be, rather than how do I make it easier for you or whatever. I mean, there's certain things I will do, like I will never have a child with a dog at night, because that's really expensive and really complicated for them to schedule, in terms of how long those people are allowed to do. I mean, we've got an interesting thing with COVID now, because filming will be going back, but how it will work will be very differently. And I'm not trying to anticipate what that will be, because I will be given very specific notes, but already I'm writing as much as possible outside, just with people naturally a little bit distant from each other, without it being because of the pandemic, but in a way that's just going to feel truthful. Because I think it's really interesting. The director of my play had a really great podcast on recently, and he said the way we watch things will be slightly differently, because we if we're watching a play, we might end up feeling really, really anxious seeing two actors right next to each other or kissing, and that's going to make us feel very stressed, because it's against what we've been told. But yeah, so I do have lots of relationships, but they're kind of all a bit secret. It's been very interesting doing a play, because that has been the opposite of theatre, of TV. That has been super collaborative, and that was like from the very, very, very first moment. Everybody was just responding directly to the play, which was amazing. And I've just read the teacher's pack for it, where the amount that they have gone into it. And so in TV, kind of the show belongs to the show, if that makes sense. The episode belongs to that brand, that show. Whereas something like theatre or play, and I think short films are very similar to theatre in this way, which is it's owned by the people that are making it. And so the play was the play, which has obviously came off during the pandemic, is the most similar thing I've ever done to the youth theatre work I did with Clint. And in actual fact, my voice as a writer it was very much in those youth theatre plays, but then you have to kind of change it a bit for TV, because you're in a new type, you're in not exactly a sausage machine, but it is kind of a bit of a sausage machine. So there's no point putting a pineapple into that sausage machine, because people are going to say, well, that is one big motherfucking spiky sausage that doesn't look like a sausage. It's like people just won't be able to comprehend it. Whereas with a play, it's a completely different thing. It's about you, the writer, and what you want to do. And also, and I do kind of believe this, which is the less money that is involved, the more autonomous you will be, and the greater control you will have, because there's less money involved. Right, Clint, I've just talked for fucking ages.
You've done an hour. You've done a solid hour. You
Wow.
breathed 4 times, which was impressive.
You what?
You breathed about 4 times. So that's really good. Right. So I think that's really helpful. Certainly I've enjoyed kind of hearing about it. I've really kind of listening to the stuff around Eastenders and how that works, I think will be of interest to some of these guys. But also that kind of final point you just made around when funding is scarce, or when something's being done for less money, the freedom that you have with that is kind of, you have an amazing freedom. And I guess for these guys as kind of student filmmakers and student writers, that freedom is kind of completely there. You can literally do whatever you want. And I would kind of echo what Sally said around the notion of doing this sort of devised approach to writing. For me, that's always stuck with me as a kind of a really helpful way of coming up with a story idea or a film idea, and just kind of bouncing ideas off people, even acting those little sequences out that you've come up with and allowing the actors to kind of develop some of that dialogue for you helps it to seem more natural. I used to really love, Sally, when we would do like rehearsed readings of things that we'd written and invite an audience in and kind of get them to give us feedback on what worked and what didn't and what they enjoyed. And that's certainly something that I try and encourage the students to do. But anyway, I don't want to talk. Do you guys have any questions for Sally before she has to head off and carry on writing?
Well, actually, I'm a big fan of Vera, I have to admit, me and my wife. And I come from a background where I spent last quarter of a century working for HM Revenue and Customs, or Customs and Excise before it merged. we loved acronyms. We used so much stuff that I imagine the average person outside would have no idea what we're talking about. When you write for Vera and the police, how strict are you to sticking to the technical aspects of their job, or are you giving them some like leeway to work with to make it more easier for the audience to understand what's going on?
Right. Well, two things I'm going to answer that. So one is I'm going to talk about medical drama first, because medical drama is full of acronyms. What I quite like in medical drama is I will write something that will feel a bit incomprehensible to the audience.
Yeah.
They will understand it. So, for example, and because I always try and write medical, I always want to have it so that doctors and nurses will go, that is so like what it is like. That is really, really real. So I remember writing this thing with somebody trapped in a helicopter. There's about to be rocks falling down. There's a doctor inside talking to somebody else, and they use this real technical thing. And you don't know what it means, what they've said, but you just see the fear of God in the person she's just talked to. And she's deliberately used that language because she doesn't want the patient to know. And what she was basically saying was, if we remove this, she was trapped in a seat. If we remove this seat, she's going to bleed out and die instantly, because there was a certain thing that was going on there. And what I loved was the audience could see from their reaction, whatever this is, fucking hell, it's bad. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I got you.
And it's a similar thing with the police thing, but I work with loads of advisors. So, for example, on that episode of Casualty, I work with a doctor advisor, a nurse advisor, a paramedic advisor. I was also working with a Coast Guard advisor, a fire service advisor, 2 helicopter pilots.
Wow.
And there was also, it was a thing that had been caused by a gunshot. So I was also working with ballistics experts. And then you get all of that, and they all come different ways. And quite often on Casualty, I would get different notes from a nurse advisor than a doctor advisor. And that is because doctors and nurses don't always agree the same.
Right.
So you would then kind of put that into the script. And then with the police, so for example, with my latest draft of Vera, it's like I have written quite a lot of crime drama now, and I've talked to an awful lot of police over and I've gone things like, I've gone into sessions which are training sessions for Bristol hospitals on how they cope in the event of a fire, which actually was just before I wrote an episode which was about a fire. And so there's a lot of stuff that you pick up. And also I did the coroner. I worked a lot with coroners and pathologists as well. Tom, can you still hear me okay? Yeah, great.
Yeah.
So it's quite interesting. So certainly for Vera, what I found, the last one was actually I got very few notes from the police. There'll be certain terms that I don't get right because people are saying SOCO, scene of crime officer now, rather than that phrase or whatever. It's important. Jimmy McGovern once said, better to be confused for 10 minutes than bored for 10 seconds. So there's a little bit of that, but there is, with Vera, I want police officers to love it. And generally the police really love Kenny, who's the oldest cop there.
Yeah, I like him.
Because he's the most realistic cop they've got. So there is stuff. I mean, we're currently waiting on notes from my forensic pathologist, but we knew she would be very, very busy because she's a pathologist and we're in a pandemic. But also her mother has died, so we only found out yesterday. So it's like, we're not talking to her. But it's but quite often what they want from experts is this. This is always a classic Casualty note. So we write in 5 acts in Casualty, and our doctor advisor will always get a note. Can we have a little twist in the medical emergency around Act 4? Because that's how story works, is that you reach a crisis at Act 4, or about 2/3 of the thing. Can we have that medical crisis? Which actually, that narrative doesn't work in medicine unless there's something wrong. Usually people are really, really ill when they arrive and they start to get better, or they get stable. They don't very often get better, and then suddenly get really bad, and then we've got to all go through. So you have to. So there are certain techniques that you use, which actually are really, really standard techniques, and just the way we depict them, we're depicting them as more as a bigger deal than they are. But so, for example, RSI, which is when you put a thing, which is when somebody can't breathe properly. So you put something inside their mouth. You put this thing like with a hook inside their mouth, and then you put a pipe, and then you put a tube down there. And so I had that with a doctor that had, I think, the start of Parkinson's, and you only have a certain amount of seconds to do that procedure. Otherwise, that person will start to choke. So the jeopardy in that was somebody with really shaking hands doing something where no, you've got to pull that out now because you can't do it in time. And so there's a way of using all that stuff because I want it to feel like it is real.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I got you. So yeah, that makes sense. Actually, that does make sense. I like that. But yeah, I just want to thank you for the Vera series. I'm a big fan of it. I love it. So thank you very much.
Right, thank you.
Any other questions? Anyone else? No? Okay, they're quiet.
Can I say one thing?
You can.
Okay. Jimmy McGovern, who I really would advise that you check out McGovern for his writing because he's brilliant. Who was the one who said better to confuse people for 10 minutes than bore them for 10 seconds. And he also said to me before, fail again and fail better. And I think there is a really big thing that we have, as creatives, we have to get our head around, which is we shouldn't be anticipating that what we write is going to be the biggest success in the world. We shouldn't think like that because that makes it impossible. We can only succeed when we fail, and we only learn through failure. And so if I thought that everything I wrote had to be the best ever thing ever, I would be so crippled with self-doubt. I've been there, and you can't write in that thing. So you just have to take that self-doubt out and ignore it, and you just have to just do it and just always constantly commit to it getting better. There's a really weird thing that happens to me when I'm doing my treatments for Vera, which is when I've been on it about 9 weeks. I'm on my 4th draft of this 37-page document, and it feels like it will never end. And then suddenly it will end, and they'll go, right, okay, we've got it. We want you to go to script now. And it's like I think one of the reasons that I work quite a lot as a writer is, and I've kind of always done this, and we did this with the youth at Clint as well, which is set your own bar higher than anyone else would. Because if you set it there and you only get to there, that is better than setting it to there and only getting there. So try and fail in the biggest way you possibly can. And don't see failure as a negative thing. Embrace it as a learning opportunity. And the only bad learning opportunity is one that you don't learn anything from. There you go, Clint.
That's perfect. And that ties in really lovely with a couple of students actually on this call who've messaged me about, I feel like my work isn't great. And I said, well, maybe it isn't, but it's better than it was then, and it's better than it was then, and it's constantly improving. You can only get better if you practice, you're going to improve.
Yeah.
So that's cool. Well, thank you very much, Sally. I found it really interesting. Hopefully you guys have too. I will put the recording on Classroom, guys, so you can have it to reflect on, and anyone else that's missed it can watch it as well. I won't bleep out the 2 swear words. It's too.
No, quite impressive.
Quite good actually for us. Normally there's a few more from me, in all fairness.
A lot more.
That's cool. So thanks, guys. Thanks for coming, and enjoy the rest of your half term. If we can all just say thank you to Sally.
Thank you very much, Sally. Thank you.
Thank you.
Cool.